Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me this morning on Eye Openers. I, of course, have my fresh cup of coffee ready to go, and so does Roy, but I've got Roy here to be the other form of my eye opener today and share some awesome insights, stories, and things you've learned along the way in your journey. Thanks for joining us, Roy.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
So you've got your coffee. I like to tell everybody we talk a little bit about the coffee first because it is kind of my thing. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so we have a lot of coffee over there. And I did grow up on Starbucks, but I quickly learned that there is much better things out there. And I love this small roastery and I guess cafe in Rhode Island called Dave's Coffee, and they have one right by where I live on the east side. So love supporting local guys. I had another local coffee guy on the other day, and yeah, so today it's Dave's. What about for you?
For me, coffee?
Do you drink it black? How do you like your coffee?
I like it anyway all the time.
Really?
One of my favorite tricks on ski mountaineering trips when you're out in the real wilderness is to ask where the nearest Starbucks is and see what sort of reaction you get.
Yes, I definitely have those thoughts. I've had those thoughts on the mountain myself, like how far am I from any kind of amenity like that? It's a very humbling experience. We're definitely going to get more into that, but I think I have yet to have someone on the show that didn't have some kind of preference for their coffee. So maybe you're just an easygoing kind of guy. You just take what's available to you. Or maybe that's what so many years on the mountain did to you. You're like, I'll take anything.
Have you ever had cowboy coffee?
No, what's that?
That's when you take a pot of water, put it on the fire, get it boiling, you dump the coffee into the pot. You let it simmer a bit, and then you take it off the fire, and you drizzle cold water into the top very carefully in a swirl, and it settles the grounds, but only somewhat. You actually wind up with very chewy coffee.
Yeah.
That's the way you do it when you haven't got a filter.
Okay. That's desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm totally not judging on that. I've probably done something similar like that at some point. Well, let's give you a proper introduction here. So Roy is joining us today as the final day of April, which is Financial Literacy Month. And Roy founded Ballentine Partners in 1984. I think I have that right. As a solution to a personal financial dilemma that your family had experienced, which I want you to tell us a bit more about in a second. And so I love that you started your journey just really deliberately solving a problem. I think people kind of lose sight of that sometimes. So, you have built this amazing firm. People say really great things about it online. I did my research to make sure I had a real leader in front of me. And actually, we got acquainted through someone else I had on Eye Openers, which is always a really good sign, hey, you should talk to this guy. So, Roy and I did have a conversation before this, about 10 days or so, and he has so many great stories to share. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but I'd love to kick this off with maybe giving people a bit of a background about how and why you founded the firm and how that pertains to financial literacy.
Sure. So I grew up in a family business. Don't laugh, but at the core of the business was a summer camp for girls where I actually met my wife.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
We had great advice for a long time, but the advice was delivered by experts working in silos rather than in a coordinated fashion. When my dad died in the early 1980s, in the aftermath of his death, settling his estate was when I discovered that our experts, because they were working in silos, had missed some really important issues that wound up actually causing me to have to sell off assets and close this camp that a lot of people loved. And some of them still haven't forgiven me for closing it. So that got me thinking about the way business owning families were receiving advice And I began to think maybe there was a better way to do things. And that literally led to the creation of what today is Ballentine Partners. So you could say I've spent the last 30 years of my life trying to get over what happened to my family by turning that into a positive experience of trying to help other families do better than my family did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm a really big believer that sometimes things happen for us and not to us. Right. And when we're in the moment, it can really feel like, why is this happening to me? You know, this is terrible. But maybe that had to happen for you guys so that you could make this really big impact and help other families avoid something like that.
Yeah, the way I look at it is when you're confronted with a problem, you can view it as a problem, or you can view it as an opportunity dressed up as a problem.
Right, right. I love that. You have so many great leadership nuggets that we're definitely going to dive into here. And so big kickoff question, which is, if we were to speak 3 years from now, what would you have accomplished that you would love to share and tell me about?
Great question. So I'm learning how to be a different kind of leader. I'm all done being CEO of the company I founded, but I'm defying all the conventional advice about what I should do next, which is I should exit, right? But I've chosen not to exit, rather to stick around. So I'd like to be able to tell you that I have figured out how to be a really good former CEO by sticking around and remaining really helpful without interfering. And the other thing I'd like to be able to tell you about is a long list of stories about various ways that I've impacted people's lives in a positive way.
Awesome. Is there a particular thing you're already thinking about in making that impact, or something that speaks to you?
Yes, I'm spending more and more of my time in mentoring relationships with people who I think of as our next generation of rising stars, helping them advance their careers and skills. And that's been tremendously meaningful work for me and hopefully helping them. And then I'm spending more and more time on charitable endeavors.
Great. Yeah, it's important to, I know I had to put a lot of thought into how I was going to integrate some charitable work along the way. And for me, it didn't, like, I love making impact. That's my whole job. And I didn't want to wait until, I felt I was financially capable of doing that. The truth is, like, we all can do that if we're conscious about it and you build it into your business plan. So I really believe in that, giving back when, we've had plentiful opportunities or had things work out. So that's awesome. I just want to say hi to Laura, who's here. Thanks so much for joining us, Laura. Feel free, everybody, like, if you have questions for Roy, if you wanted to dive into something more specific, just let me know. So, you mentioned something really important, which is this transition in your role with the firm that you founded. And personally, I've seen a lot of that in my work and hasn't always gone smoothly or well. So what do you think is the greatest opportunity within that to kind of get that right? Like, what do you see, as maybe the opportunity of the new role or how you're kind of carving out this new role for yourself? What's the opportunity in that?
I think there's a tremendous opportunity for personal growth, in this case for me. When I think back about the kind of leader that I used to be versus what I now aspire to be, I actually don't like the person I used to be, and I hope I'm not that person anymore. So there's a big personal growth opportunity in this situation. And as I said earlier, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for me to have a positive impact on the lives of others by really helping them turbocharge their personal growth.
Okay, that's so important. I love hearing you say that at this stage of your career that you're still focused on that personal development and developing others. I think that just really speaks to what it means to truly be a leader, is to forever be a student and to kind of be humbled by that, like knowing what you don't know and hiring, that gap or pursuing it yourself. Right. So
Can I add more one more thing about that?
Please, yeah.
So I never used to think very much about the word helpful, but helpful has actually become, I think it's probably my favorite word now. So when somebody ends a conversation with me saying, wow, that was really helpful, that totally makes my day.
Awesome. Awesome. So right now you're focused on that giving back and making that impact. And that's what fills you up right now. That's what provides that purpose for you. That's really cool. That's awesome. So, how about, I know you have some good stories in there. Tell us about a time when maybe your mindset about what it meant to be a leader or rise up in the ranks or whatever was different than how you approach it now.
Yeah, there are a couple of transformational moments, I guess that is the way I think of them. So,
or I call them eye openers.
the first one was a totally accidental encounter with Nolan Ryan. Now, those who know me laugh at this story every time I tell it, because I can't even match up the names of professional sports teams with cities they belong to. Right. But if you ask me about ski mountaineering or sailing, I can talk all day about that. But anyway, I by accident, I wound up at a very small event. There were maybe 30 people there, where Nolan Ryan was a featured speaker. And I thought what I was going to hear was baseball stories, which would have been okay. But instead, what I heard was Nolan Ryan talk about his life mission statement. Mm-hmm. And he shared it with us and explained how it works for him. And I was so moved by what he shared that I decided on the spot to adopt his mission statement as my own, because I couldn't think of a way to improve upon it. His mission statement is really simple. It's to be a husband worth loving, a father worth respecting, and a leader worth following. Covers the three key roles in my life. Mm-hmm. And it does so in a way that's really short, impactful, memorable, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that got me thinking about how I needed to change my life to do a better job of living up to that aspiration. Mm-hmm. So that was the first thing. The second thing was a friend of mine introduced me, again, sort of by accident, to a book by the Arbinger Institute called Leadership and Self-Deception. The title really caught my attention. I wondered, what does leadership have to do with self-deception? What are they talking about? This can't be right. But I started the book, and by chapter number 1, I was thinking, oh boy, this nails me. I am in deep trouble. Change.
It knew you.
I am engaged in massive self-deception.
In what way?
Well, the use of the term by Arbinger needs a little explanation. The way they're using it, they're challenging leaders to think about what you stand for with your personal values and what you want your organization to stand for. So it's about values and culture, right? Corporate mm-hmm. culture. And then they ask the very important question: does your own behavior as a leader actually comply with what you say you value? And if it doesn't, you need to change, right? Well, that nailed me.
I love that you're sharing that. And I think that really speaks to, honestly, again, true leadership, that you're being willing to share where you didn't get it right, but how, at this point in time, many years later, after that moment, it really stuck with you, and you have the humility to kind of share it and show us how it shaped you. That's just such an important point. I feel like people are talking about values now in organizations. They're understanding maybe there's some corporate social responsibility here that people are paying attention to. Data is showing us that people are choosing jobs kind of based on these things outside of just their salary. But what does it mean to work for this organization? What's the organization's impact on the world? But you can't just, have a 2-hour values exercise, put it into a poster with some good design and then call it a day. Like that's not what this means. And I know that you have an ethos by which, Ballentine has lived and grown by. Maybe you could speak to how you made sure it didn't just live on the paper.
Sorry, Brittany, something happened to the bandwidth just as you were finishing that question.
I hope the rest of you guys heard me. So I'm asking you, Roy, how did you, when you had this understanding of the self-deception and the Nolan Ryan story, how did you take that information, turn it into your ethos, of how you were going to lead Ballentine Partners? And how did you make sure this wasn't just something that was going to live in a document, that it was going to really live and breathe within the organization's culture?
This goes right to the heart of the matter, at least in my case. So I would say the biggest change that I decided I needed to make was, if you had worked for me back when I used to be the way I was, I keep wondering, am I still somewhat that way? But back in the old days, let's say, my attitude toward you would have been, hey, you work for me. I work really hard. You're here to help me fulfill my vision, right? And that's what you're supposed to do. The core of that would have been, you work for me, right? The new me would treat you this way. I work for you. I really appreciate that you signed on to this organization because you believe in its mission. And my role now is to make sure that you succeed.
Right. Really key difference there. Totally flipping it on its head. And now, why do you think, number one, what did that bring out in employees when you shifted that? How did you notice a change in them? And number two, why do you think other CEOs can't make that shift?
The behavior it brought out in employees was, the attitudes went from good to great. I guess they were already, at least okay, but people actually began behaving much more like owners. And we wound up making a lot of people owners. I have 22 partners now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it allowed us to do a number of things. We actually codified the path to partnership and published it to the entire company, so that anybody who wanted to ask, why did so-and-so get to be a partner? If I want to do that, what do I need to do? Is now publicly available information inside our company, right down to the entry-level ranks. So it allowed us to lay all that out, along with all our financial results and everything that are all made available to every employee, much more open environment, because level of trust went up, everything good happened, right? And now I've forgotten the second part of your question.
No problem. I've got them right here. Why do you believe that more CEOs can't make this shift when you flipped it, on its head? Why can't they? It's so clear that's like, invest in your team, right? Like, ask them what they need to be successful. Your whole job is to make them successful, right? But people aren't doing this. Yeah.
So another impactful experience along the way for me was chapter 2 of Jim Collins's book, Good to Great, where Jim Collins talks about level 5 leadership and what a level 5 leader looks like. One of the points he makes in that chapter was that when he's taught these concepts to leaders, the question he often encounters is, can you learn to become a level 5 leader? And the answer is, yeah, if you try, at least, to some extent. So I think a lot of it may come down to just one's willingness to continue learning as a leader. Are you willing to look in the mirror and recognize and accept the fact that if you're struggling in some way, maybe the problem is the guy in the mirror or the gal in the mirror. And that if you decide that's where the problem is, you can actually do something about it. You know, one of the most difficult lessons for me as a leader was I had to learn that I actually can't control anybody else's behavior. I can't. The only person I can control is me. So if I'm having if I decide that I'm having a problem with somebody, right? If the only person I can control is me, I have to start solving the problem by changing my own behavior and then see how that other person responds, because I can't get that other person to change any other way. That was a hard lesson for me.
Right, right. You know, it's a really fine line between trying to understand, like, are people showing up in this way as a reflection of me and what I bring to the table, you know, and how I'm managing the organization, without kind of taking on too much responsibility at the same time for how that person is behaving. Because ultimately, a lot of how people behave, how they manage problems and stress says a lot about them. So it's a really interesting, like, dynamic there. So
do we have time for a quick story to illustrate that point?
Totally do. First, I just want to say hi. So many people are saying hi. They're like loving this conversation. And Paula just said, moving from a power leadership mindset to a servant leadership mindset, it takes a lot of courage. So I think she just really underscored everything you just said. But yeah, go ahead. Give us another one.
So recently, one of my colleagues came to me with a story about a problem employee complaint. So I listened to the complaint, and then I said to this colleague, you know, this is really interesting because I just looked at the performance reviews for the person you're complaining about, and other people we work in teams, other team leaders working with this employee have glowing reports about the employee's performance. Your team stands out for being the only one that's not having a good experience with this employee. Why do you think that is? And the response I got right away was, wait a minute, I'm not the problem. That person's the problem. Well, right then and there, I knew that wasn't true, right? So the discussion went from there, and we eventually did discover some things about the leader's behavior that were triggering the problem, but it was a challenge to get through that discussion constructively.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like it really highlighted, you know, some of the issues that were kind of underlying there you were able to solve. That's another great point too. When there's some form of conflict or even just friction in an organization, they so quickly want to just like diagnose and like solve the problem, which I understand that, you know, it's uncomfortable to have that. But so often the thing that's like boiling up to the surface is a symptom. It's not the root cause. And instead of just trying to be so quick to diagnose, right, we just need to be curious and just pay attention, right? Like you asked that one question and you got so much information. But if you were trying to just diagnose and solve, right, you would have missed some of that. You would have missed really the root cause, and it would have led to more and more instances, right, before you figured that out. It's a really important piece there. So, well, you've shared a lot of breakthroughs with us. That was my next question, and I'm sure that there will be more. But I guess I want to jump to a more challenging one, if you're willing. What would you identify as your biggest weakness, and how have you seen it hold you back?
That's an easy one. I can be quite impatient when I feel like I'm being confronted with silly people with silly ideas. It pushes all my bad buttons. I have to learn to just zip it for a while and listen. I can be quite impatient with that.
Okay, so
that's a particular challenge in charitable organizations where you don't get to pick. You know, you may be chairing a board or part of a board with people that you didn't pick, right? So you've got to play the hand you've been dealt, and oh my God, some of the stuff that happens is just.
And it's silly because it feels like, why are we going down this path, or this makes no sense, or like I can't believe you think that's a good idea, kind of thing. Yeah. That's tough. And that to me though brings up another interesting distinction though that we have to figure out, which is, okay, is that just my opinion? Am I being closed-minded to some degree? Like, why is this triggering me? Right? I find myself when you were talking about, oh, I'm not able to control that person, man, I watch myself sometimes. And when I'm in a situation like that, I can get totally impatient and completely frustrated. I'm like, no, they just need to change to be like this way over here and it'd be so much easier. Why can't they see that? Why aren't they doing that? And I start to like question my own skills, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm supposed to be able to show people they can do this. And then start making it too big. But then I try to slow down and think, okay, well, am I right? You know? And I mean, sometimes I'm sure that you're right, that these things are silly, they're off mission, they don't make sense. Like we should not be pouring resources into something. But I do try to stop myself in those moments and assess, like, am I being too close-minded right now? And how could that be different? Does that ever, Matt saying, sounds like my life as a parent? Yes, that's definitely when those moments show up too, right? I think being a parent is one of the most humbling experiences ever, because you created these little monsters and yet you cannot control them at the exact same time. And then when they have bad behavior, you're like, wait, is that my part of the genetics or something else? I'm sure you've had those experiences too, Roy.
Definitely.
So when you're in that silly moment and it just feels like maybe frustrating or challenging, and you said you're working on your patience, what else has been effective for you in growing into that strength or weakness, growing it to build it into a strength?
Well, when I stopped being CEO, I lost all the power that I had in the organization. This organization that had been running for 30 years since I was employee number one, right? Yeah. So giving all that up voluntarily, and I gave it up, by the way, I deliberately gave it up way before anybody felt there was a need for Mike to do so. That was another deliberate decision. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I gave all that up, and now the only way I can get things done is through influence without power.
Right.
Whole different leadership skill.
Completely different, motivators you have to pull on for people, and you have to be a bit more creative. What a cool experience, though, to have previously like held all the power and the decision making and the control, and now to realize, okay, I do have some influence, but I don't have control, and you don't have the real authority in a sense, And so that is, it must be so interesting to walk into that after having had all the control. I think a lot of people experience that in reverse, right? If you're working up the ladder in an organization, you have like less influence and power and you slowly gain it, but you had the opposite. I just have to point, I just can't think without talking about this comment someone wrote. Did you see what Laura wrote? Can you see it on your end, Roy?
No.
Laura says, Roy, I love how your outfit matches the one in the painting behind you. It's so funny because we talked about this before we went live. And she says that, and Laura's a branding expert. She says, great consistency in your personal brand. So you should take credit for that, really, not have it be an accident.
But the kid in the painting is me at a much younger age, holding a model airplane that I really loved. That was a wire control model airplane, but I was never allowed to fly that plane. Only adults flew it. And because I was considered too young to control it, it actually flew really fast in a circle. And then one day the adults crashed it, and that was the end of my model airplane.
Uh-oh. People are really loving the influence is power conversation. So I think that's really resonating with people, because no matter where you're at, right, in an organization, you can certainly appreciate that. And like Paula says, influence is power, which is completely true. Eric saying, love influence without power. Confident people are comfortable being vulnerable. And I think you've really illustrated that for us today. So thank you for being so willing to share and just, be vulnerable with your story and be open. So what would you say is the number one behavior? We've talked about a lot of things that you've done and how you've grown throughout your career, but what's the number one behavior that got you to where you are today, but might hold you back from where you're going?
I'd go back to the impatience issue. So my impatience has caused, it's related to my drive to get things done. So that's really helped get me where I am, but it's not going to work very well going forward.
So what do you do with that drive? Because I work with a lot of leaders who have transitioned, outside of like founding or CEO role, and they still have it. They still have that drive. Is it a new project? Have you just poured that energy into something else, or are you trying to dampen it?
Oh no, I'm not trying to dampen it. If anything, I'm amping it up.
Okay.
So what one of the happy learnings that I've had since I stopped being CEO and sort of got my life back and could decide how to reallocate some of my time is that as I've gotten more and more involved in some charitable activities, I've discovered that I can contribute value way beyond my financial giving ability. This relates to a comment you made earlier about providing financial support. But people like you, actually, with your leadership skills and strategic thinking ability, can probably contribute far more value by contributing those skills than you could ever contribute financially. Most charitable organizations, in my experience, are really weak on strategy. So if those of us who have strategic thinking ability can help with that, that's very important.
Mm-hmm. That's a really great point and a good call to action for all of us to kind of look at what are the ways in which we can contribute to our communities, organizations that have maybe contributed to us in some way, and really give back when we find the opportunity to. And I've definitely come across so many individuals that feel like, well, when I get to a certain amount of money, I can financially contribute, or, once I get a little bit further, maybe then I can do it. And I've actually really found that making it part of my business model has, number one, allowed me to really find the space and time. And I feel really great about when I'm contributing because I already know I've planned for it. It's not like I need to stress because I'm not in my office, like making money. I've planned for this time away. I've allowed the model to make the space for it. But it has also led to incredibly great networking and having the time to just really come up with ideas and be part of these brainstorming meetings and conversations that have just been so impactful for me and really helped keep me fresh at my game too. So it's not only, I hope, created a great impact, but it's also served me and brought a lot into my life too. So thanks for making that point. I think it's really important that if we can really try to carve a way to do that now and not wait till we're older, that it can really give more to our actual career and our organizations now. So, Roy, I just want to say again, thank you so much for being here, sharing all this wonderful information with us. I know I can tell from the chat that people have enjoyed it themselves. I know people will watch this later, they'll comment, so make sure to check back in. But how could people find you? If they wanted to follow up on some of these stories, if they wanted to hear behind the scenes what it was like at an all-girls camp to be the only boy, how could they find you and how could they contact you?
Best way is through my company email. I'm not, due to our company security issues, I'm not active on LinkedIn or any other social platforms, but my corporate email, rballentine@ballentinepartners.com.
I'll make sure it gets in the comments section too, so people can find it easily and spam you. Okay, well, any famous last words?
Thanks for having me. Been a real pleasure.
Awesome. And thank you for sharing so many eye-openers with us today. Thank you to all of you guys for joining us, for contributing. And you guys really take our eye-openers here and you bring them to life. So please continue to join us on Friday mornings, 9:15. And thanks again. Have a great weekend, everyone.